Hello and officially welcome. I know you've heard my voice a few times already. I wanted to first and foremost say Happy Residents Councils Week. My name is Melissa McVie and I am OARC's Education and Home Support Facilitator. I'll be presenting today alongside Dee Lender, Executive Director. In today's session, we'll be discussing resident councils and exploring a new normal. And as you may be aware, today's webinar falls in the middle of our very first Resident Council Week in Ontario. We hope that you have found some creative ways to acknowledge and to celebrate the residents and their respective residents' councils this week. We also hope that today's session will help inspire residents and their home teams to start to move forward with council activities. And for those already on this path, we hope this strengthens your confidence in doing so. So before we jump in, I wanted to go over a few quick housekeeping items. You'll notice that all phone and audio lines have been muted in an effort to eliminate background noise and distractions. We'll have time protected for a live discussion at the end of today's webinar, at which time we'll invite you to type your questions into the chat box, or you can use the raise your hand feature if you'd like to be unmuted to speak. Our session today is also being recorded for education purposes and will be archived on the OARC website. The webinar slide deck is available to you now under the materials section of the training toolbar. We will also share our slides with the video recording of today's session later this week in a follow-up email. So, Dee, I'm not sure if you'd just like to jump in and say hello. I think we had accidentally got you muted, but Dee's our co-presenter today. I'm just going to okay, I'm sorry about that. We'll just see if we can get Dee unmuted. But I wanted to start us off, get us a little warmed up with a poll. A poll question. We'd like to know, has your home started to reconvene residents' council meetings? And we'll get Jen, who's working behind the scenes, to open that poll. It should be popping up on your screen now. So have you and your home teams started to resume or reconvene resident council meetings? Is it A, yes, B, no, or C, we never stopped having meetings? So we'll just give everyone another minute or two. I think we've got about 80% of our audience voted. If you are having issues with the poll, I've heard depending on the device you're using for the platform or the session today, you might need to go to the window view for the poll and then click back, and it should allow you to vote. So we'll give you another minute and then review our responses. Okay, so we've got a good percentage of votes in, and I'd like to share this with the group. We're a little divided here. It looks like we've got 54% of you saying yes, you have started to move forward with resident councils and have some meetings under your belt. 36% of our audience said no, we have yet to start. And about 10% were able to continue having council meetings throughout the last 5 or 6 months. So we're going to be calling on those who have said yes. We're going to really draw on your lived experience and expertise during our live discussion later today. And we do hope that that 36% leaves feeling inspired with some fresh ideas. So thank you for sharing that. Now, during our time together today, we will briefly review the current Ministry of Long-Term Care directives and the impact that they have had for residents and residents' councils. We'll then explore 3 ways that residents and their home teams can start to reconnect and adapt in order to hold resident council meetings during outbreaks and beyond. We'll touch on some strategies to help residents feel more informed, including OARC's communication tool that was released back in the spring, as well as other techniques for communication that have been shared with us by other long-term care homes and residents that have been successful. We'll also share a popular new platform for residents across Ontario to network and stay connected with their peers. These are called Ontario's weekly virtual resident forums. And then we'll devote the last part of today's webinar to some live discussion and sharing of promising practices, which is really what everyone's here to talk about or hear about today. So Dee, I'll hand it over to you now to talk about the operational context of resident councils.
Hi, everybody. It's Dee. I'm the Executive Director of OARC. I'm so happy to be co-presenting with Melissa today. The poll was very inspiring and encouraging, I must say. So it's showing us that about 65% of those joining us today are engaged in some semblance of residents' council meetings. So I really do encourage those of you who clicked no to also enter in your questions, your concerns, your apprehensions, and we can do some solution solving or some solution finding together today as we go forward. So on March 16th, in alignment with government directives, OARC recommended that residents' council meetings be postponed as a safety precaution during the onset and management of COVID-19. And this is really when COVID hit us hard. What's the impact of not having residents' council meetings and limited peer connection? I just want to pause for just a moment to remember why residents' councils are so important. They really serve 2 main functions. One is to provide a venue for residents to come to consensus thoughts and ideas and concerns that inform management and make positive change in their home to raise awareness and increase residents' quality of life. And the second main function for councils is to provide a safe forum for peer-to-peer support, residents listening and supporting each other. Both of these functions are critical for a healthy sense of self, a sense of purpose, well-being, having control and impact on one's life and environment, for exercising empathy, care, and concern for each other. So what have the impacts been? Well, residents' council meetings have been described as lifeline for residents, and without them, residents have been experiencing a wide range of emotions. Over the last 6 months, we have heard directly from residents across the province who have expressed to us that they're feeling, and these are their words, feeling imprisoned, muzzled, silenced, isolated, frustrated, uninformed, fearful, etc. Residents have missed each other. Resident leaders have told us that they're so used to watching and listening, investing time with each other, that the absence of that opportunity has really resulted in a deep sense of loss and sadness. Many homes and organizations have also acknowledged that direct communication with residents throughout the pandemic has been a real gap and largely forgotten. The underlying intention of homes has been to protect residents from the virus first and foremost, and to shield residents from some of the associated losses, including the loss of friends and peers. More recently, we've been hearing from many residents and team members seeking permission to move forward with residents' councils. We at OARC believe that it is time to safely proceed, and we're excited that as of last week, on September 8th, our partners at the Ministry of Long-Term Care released a memo to all homes in Ontario, giving the green light to start moving forward with residents' councils. The memo reminded long-term care home operators that residents' councils are mandated in the Long-Term Care Homes Act, and they really must be supported. We're very thankful for this clarity. Until now, in many homes, there seemed to be a sense of confusion or apprehension in some homes across the province that during COVID-19, residents' council meetings were to remain on hiatus. This is not the case. Government recognizes, and residents absolutely, and many, many homes, team members recognize the intrinsic value of residents' councils and support the reconvening of residents' council activities. The memo is available on longtermcarehomes.net, and the title of that memo is Memo from Ministry of Long-Term Care. Residents' councils are mandated in Long-Term Care Homes Act and must be supported. I want to briefly, excuse me, take this opportunity to remind you about the key ingredients, or the pillars really, that make up an effective residents' council in every long-term care home. Our why is rooted in legislation. Again, our partners at the Ministry of Long-Term Care have told us on many occasions that residents' councils are essential. Government values the resident voice, and this is reflected in the decision to mandate through the Long-Term Care Homes Act that residents' councils exist and are supported in every home in Ontario, long-term care home. The recent memo that I just summarized reminds us of this value and necessity, and includes sort of a bit of a call to action. Residents' councils must be supported and start to reconvene so that residents have their platform for shaping the place that they call home, and to provide that very safe venue for peer support. Within every long-term care home, there are 3 components of an effective council. Engaged resident leaders. While every resident living in your home is a member of residents' council, typically there's a core group of highly engaged residents who pick up the torch and lead the council affairs. A supportive, receptive residents' council assistant who's acceptable to the residents. They are not a member of the residents' council. They take direction from residents. They work with residents, drawing on their individual interests, leveraging strengths. They maintain privacy and confidentiality. And when acting in the residents' council support capacity, they are in fact representing the council, not the long-term care home. They are to be impartial. An administrator who sets the tone of collaboration in the home and who's open to communication with residents is also critical to the success of a residents' council. This type of administrator seeks the advice of residents, takes recommendations and looks for evidence of their lived experience, takes all that to heart in operational decision-making. They understand that the law, the Long-Term Care Homes Act, is the home, or supports that the facility, the physical structure, is actually home for the residents. And therefore they must be as engaged as possible in decisions that impact day-to-day living, just as you and I have valuable impact in decision-making in our own lives. And these types of administrators see that residents' councils are valuable and really a primary vehicle to stay connected to and informed of the resident voice. So we're going to do another poll question here. Melissa, over to you.
Thanks, Dee. Of course, I was muted over here talking away. I just wanted to get a better sense of some of the barriers that you and your home teams are experiencing when it comes to holding resident council meetings right now. So if you could take a few moments to respond, there might be multiple responses that resonate with you. I think from the many homes that we have been connecting with, it's a combination of factors, but there might be one or two standout factors for you, depending on your home's situation. Okay, we'll just let that roll for another moment or two. I think we're almost at 70% response rate, and we'd like to hear from as many of our participants as possible. Okay, thank you so much for that. And interestingly, I think coming out right on top, we've got 71% of our participants saying the infection control measures, could be the group size restrictions or the inability to mix residents from different floors. That has been a primary barrier for 71% of you. We also have 40% saying that the building infrastructure, the design or the layout of the building has not been conducive to have meetings at this time. We have a bit of a tie. 19% of participants say technology, so it could be the lack of the technology, having screens or a reliable internet connection that makes virtual connection almost impossible. And I'm happy to see that 20% feel that there are not any barriers, or they're willing to work through other perceived barriers. So that's also promising. Any other thoughts on that, Dee?
Thanks, Melissa. It's interesting and not surprising that 71% are citing strict infection control measures. We have heard this consistently. Practices across the province seem to vary. Residents' lived experience is varied quite significantly across the province. And that can be a result of public health units giving different types of advice and recommendations and guidance across the province, depending on what's happening in the community. And it can also be attributed to, as we've learned, management teams with the best of intentions, really taking the hardest, most strict, most extreme interpretation of the directives, certainly to keep residents, team members, family members safe, but needing to soften a little bit in terms of having the pendulum swing a little bit more in terms of providing opportunity for some small group programming. I know of a few homes, for example, that have never had COVID in their home, either with residents or with team members, and yet residents still are completely isolated with no opportunity for small group programming whatsoever. So we do hope to provide some clarity on that and encouragement in terms of breathing a little bit and I guess looking to have a better balance, if you will.
Thank you, Dee. And thank you everyone for logging in those responses. This information will really help us to frame our discussion a bit later today, and we'll keep these points in mind as we move through our presentation. So this brings us to our newest OARC tool. We've just launched hot off the presses a new guidance document for resident councils. Councils were hungry for this information, and this document outlines some key considerations and some strategies to use during outbreaks. We've linked the tool on this slide. It's also linked in the materials section on your go-to training toolbar, or it's live on our website. if you haven't had a chance to have eyes on it yet or to share this with your home teams and your resident councils. But this guidance document was created in consultation with resident leaders, resident council assistants, and administrators. And it's based on their lived experiences through the pandemic, some of their direct feedback and problem solving, and some of the promising practices that emerged through our discussions together. And I really think so far we've impressed upon you that resident councils play that essential role in every long-term care home, and that we believe with some modifications, some creativity, balanced with that careful adherence to the home level and regional infection control protocols, that resident councils can safely reconvene and they can maintain meaningful connections even during outbreaks. So outside of the current pandemic, we know that regular cold and flu season often means extended disruptions or back-to-back cancellations of resident council meetings. And as we've heard, this can leave residents feeling disconnected from the place they call home and their peers. So continuity and ongoing communication is important to residents, and that is really what prompted us to create this tool, not only for the current situation, but for moving forward. And on these next few slides, we're going to review 3 specific strategies that emerged from our task force or our discussion group. And we're going to highlight some home-specific examples and some success stories so you can see how it works in practice. So there are a number of variables that I just wanted to lay out first that might impact the way that your home's resident council decides to proceed with council meetings. First, you've got the consideration of outbreak status. Is your home currently virus-free? Is the virus or the outbreak impacting your whole home, or is it isolated to one home area or floor? Can residents leave their own rooms at this time, or can they leave their home areas or their floors? And with this consideration or these details at the back of your mind, you can start to explore your options and decide what meeting format is going to best suit your situation, and also be comfortable with knowing that this may change over time. A second consideration is, of course, your home's size and your layout of the building. These factors might also help you determine the meeting formats that you experiment with. Your home's resident council governance structure is also relevant here. For example, is your residence council currently led by one resident, or do you have a small resident council executive or a shared leadership team in place? Do you have resident representatives on each home area that can act as champions for their peers or council spokespeople? Or if resident leaders are isolated on their floors and they can't physically meet with other residents, how can you maintain a connection? This is where your creativity can come in with the meeting formats we'll be suggesting shortly. And now we also encourage you to think carefully about resident preferences and the range of needs in your home. If you're just getting started, that's perfectly okay. It's a great time now to start asking residents to share their ideas and their vision for how resident council and how meetings might work moving forward. The council belongs to them, so of course they are the experts by experience. The OARC team also wants to give you permission to be less structured. Your meetings do not need to adhere to a strict agenda or cover all aspects of the OARC meeting minute template. Council meetings are intended to be safe spaces for residents to speak about what's important to them and to provide that peer-to-peer support. So the format can be relaxed, especially right now as you're transitioning and getting the ball rolling again. Let the residents guide the discussions in the meeting. An important piece of advice that we heard from the residents and the long-term care home teams that we consulted with was to work with what you've got and start where you are. Utilize existing technology, redeploy and leverage resources that you've got, and use a bit of creativity when you're exploring your solutions. We know that resident council operations need time and effort, and of course, that whole home support to be executed successfully. You will also likely encounter challenges when it comes to trying new approaches for residents council. And this is going to be trial and error, trying multiple formats. This is okay. So wherever possible, we urge you to seek direct resident feedback. Maybe you've had your first meeting after 5 or 6 months. After that meeting, give the residents an opportunity to share what worked, what didn't work, what would we like to change next time, how can we enhance things. So again, residents are your experts. Defer to them. You don't need to have all the answers. The residents will help you get that vision for moving forward. And lastly, we encourage you, as you are able, whether it's resident councils or home capital budget considerations, invest where you can. Is there an opportunity to invest in upgrading equipment, purchasing iPads, or perhaps you could boost your home's internet connection, or have it available throughout your home, not just the common areas. Perhaps you could purchase and install or fundraise for smart TVs to be installed in your dining rooms or other suitable meeting places where residents can be safely spaced out for meetings. So really get creative with these considerations at the back of your mind. Now we're going to jump into, okay, how do we actually do this? What does it look like? And a popular approach that we've heard time and time again for reconvening resident councils is to hold your meeting in those communal spaces where residents are already gathering, such as dining rooms or your activity room, or even in the lobby, the front lobby. We heard a success story from Peter D. Clark Home in Ottawa. 2 of those resident leaders have been in touch with me regularly, and they were so thrilled. They had their first council meeting, and it was a real success, and they just gathered organically in the front lobby using that physical distancing. You've already, in your dining rooms, in activity spaces, you already have a captive audience. You're already using your infection control measures, you're safely distancing residents, and meetings can be much more informal and fun in this format. Residents may need assistance, so it's important to kind of think about how residents can get the most out of these meetings, especially if they're in these varied settings. We want to make sure that residents can still see and hear the speaker, so you might need to carefully help reposition someone so they can see the speaker. You might consider using a wireless microphone or an amp PA system, especially if team members or someone who is speaking is wearing a mask. It might muffle their voice, so any way that you can amplify and make the sound a little clearer. Another important consideration here, especially in the dining room, is to communicate with other home departments in advance. At OARC, we're always very big on collaboration, and that doesn't just mean the programs department working with resident council, it's a whole home approach. So you might need to communicate with your home's care teams, your dietary and housekeeping teams. If you're going to use a space like a dining room and you're planning on meeting before or after a meal, this is going to require some careful planning and flexibility to shift around some of those established routines and staffing complements. But Middlesex Terrace here, they're in Delaware, and they're featured, a few residents and their administrator, Jan, are featured on this slide, and they are evidence that this is possible. It is possible to be successful with this modified meeting format. In this photo, we've got Jan giving home updates to residents while they're gathered together in the dining room. And this resident council has been successful in their efforts to host adapted resident council meetings throughout the pandemic. So they're able to shift gears and modify and use a space that they were already gathering and distancing. And Jan was also very diligent about keeping the residents informed on an ongoing basis. So not just a monthly basis, she would be providing updates, walking about, and this really helped to establish trusting relationships and collaboration between the home's management team and the residents. I also wanted to celebrate and share. Actually, I wanted to just mention that Middlesex Terrace is a smaller home with 104 residents. So it is a bit more of an intimate setting, and they did have the flexibility to do this approach for council meetings. Another excellent example, unfortunately I don't have a picture, came from Southbridge Roseview in Thunder Bay. They shared that they've successfully had 1 or 2 outdoor meetings. Of course, Ontario fall and winter, we're moving into some chillier temperatures, so this might not be a current solution, but the outdoor meetings through the summer months were very well received. They were able to use a portable PA system to amplify voices so residents could hear one another, and they were able to follow their regular meeting format only in this new setting. So I know we've had a lot of questions about the size limitations, and I'm going to hand it over to Dee to add a little bit of clarity there.
Thanks, Melissa. So to add to that, we have had, as Melissa said, some inquiries about group size. I recently confirmed with government that as per the Office of the Chief Medical Officer of Health, indoor gatherings are limited to the number of people that can fit into a room, maintaining physical distancing of 2 meters between all individuals. This could be to a maximum of 50 people. Individuals who live in the same household can be closer than 2 meter limit, but really this last bit refers to a nuclear family unit or individual household, not a large congregate living situation like a long-term care home. Outdoor gatherings follow the same rules, but up to 100 people. So based on this information, the number that you can gather together will depend on where the gatherings will take place and how many residents can the room hold while maintaining physical distancing. And of course, another consideration is how residents will get from point A to point B in their home. Specifically, if the use of a small elevator is necessary, that may prohibit larger group gatherings, simply because of the length of time needed to assemble residents from across their home if only 1 or 2 people can use the elevator at one time. While this is the government guidance, we also recognize that COVID-19 doesn't follow rules or policy. There are spots or communities, hotspots in Ontario that are struggling more than others with community spread. And because of that, they have higher numbers of infections. So public health units are essential, and they're working so hard across Ontario, advising homes directly, especially if there needs to be additional safeguards in place, depending on the location of your home. Next slide, please. One silver lining of the current pandemic is that we have been opened up to new ways of connecting with friends and loved ones using different communication formats and technology. Working with your residence council assistant and home administrator, we invite you to explore what technology might be available in your home to support a virtual council meeting. Even if you're just starting out, perhaps there is a way to connect your residence council leadership team or executive members. Or if you have resident representatives on each floor or home area, perhaps they can connect virtually to share an update in real time from their respective areas. For example, if residents from throughout your home are unable to come together safely in one place for a traditional style meeting, you might gather small clusters of residents safely and physically distanced to participate in a virtual meeting from the comfort of their own floors, home areas, dining rooms. In some cases, you can connect a computer or a tablet device to a television or screen that residents can see and interact with their peers from other home areas in real time. There are a number of free and paid meeting platforms that can be used for this purpose. You don't have a steady internet connection or technology available? Well, our residents isolated to their own bedrooms or home areas. Perhaps a consideration is to try to connect resident leaders using telephones. A teleconference line can allow multiple residents to meet and share without being in the same room or same part of the building. So the top photo that you see here is Gertrude from St. Patrick's Home of Ottawa, and she's using a resident computer in a common area to connect with another resident leader who lives on another floor in the same home. And the bottom photo is a resident connecting with peers by telephone or teleconference. You know, this also reminds me of the heartbreaking comment that we've heard many times over the last few months from residents that they are absolutely missing each other. Many residents have well-established friendships throughout their home and have been isolated from their dear friends for months. Many resident leaders have told us that they typically would normally make rounds in their home, so to speak, and check in with various co-residents. Virtual visits were provided in many homes, connecting residents with family members. Let's not forget about the opportunity that's before us to keep residents connected with each other right in their very own home. Over to you, Melissa.
Thank you. A third format for meetings that's been very popular among homes that have started to reconvene resident council is this small meeting format. Essentially, instead of holding one large whole home resident council meeting, you will hold smaller scale meetings on different home areas or wherever residents can safely gather in their respective floors. We've heard that the smaller meeting format, it boasts several advantages. We've heard that the meetings are more inclusive and engaging, and that residents who might not have typically attended that large meeting off of their floor, the residents are more comfortable attending in a more intimate setting just down the hall with those familiar faces, their peer group. Meetings can still be held in your preferred format following your agenda, and as with your previous meetings, minutes can still be captured by your resident council assistant or another person of the resident's choosing. It's still important to compile those sets of minutes from each of those mini meetings, pull them together into one comprehensive set of minutes, and then as per your regular minute review process, have your resident leaders review and approve that. And then the next step is to share that with your home administrator if there are any questions or follow-up items that need attention. And once your minutes have been approved, you would still distribute copies of those minutes and post them as per your resident council protocols. Now, I have heard many homes have one dedicated resident council board that's on a main floor of your home. You might need to get a bit creative and create resident council boards on every home area so that the meeting minutes are accessible to all. Another benefit of this smaller meeting format is the fact that you can really have a deep dive. You can have in-depth discussions about resident experiences on their respective floors. So what's important? What are the common themes for that group? And when you bring them together to get that picture of the whole home experience, there might be some overlap or some real distinctions. So it can be really helpful for your resident leaders to have this information so they can advocate on behalf of their peers. For all of the three meeting formats that we've talked about, those dining room meetings, the virtual meetings, and for the smaller scale meetings, you can still proceed as usual. You can still extend invitations for your guest speakers, encourage your administrator to come as an invited guest as desired or as questions come up. I also wanted to mention that it is important to keep some structure, to still have those meeting minutes happening. But again, you can have a loose agenda, but let the residents guide the meeting. You can defer discussion topics to a future meeting. The OARC tools simply include suggestions, and they have topics that remind residents that they have the right to ask questions on certain areas of home operations, but it's not a requirement that residents focus on resident rights or other items like that. I just wanted to highlight the two beautiful photos that came from two different homes, organizations. At the top, we've got Tilbury Manor. They're a 75-bed home with it's designed with 2 floors, 2 stories. Because of their layout and their inability to come together as they typically would, they started conducting separate meetings on their 2 different floors. Initially, they kind of took a progressive approach where they started meeting with residents one-to-one in their resident rooms. Then they graduated to small group discussions of 5, and they've moved more recently to groups of 10. So they're using one of their activity or their dining room space here. One of the positive outcomes that Tilbury wanted to share with our group was that that positive outcome, that resident involvement in council has increased tremendously because of the intimacy and the accessibility of these small resident council meetings. The picture on the bottom comes to us from Janet, a programs manager from a Primacare home. And she did share that Primacare has adopted a roving resident council approach where they travel from home area to home area. They hold mini meetings in the resident lounges. And they also share that same experience that the turnout for these meetings was really quite high. We had a lot of engagement, great discussion, and Primacare also uses that process of collating the sets of minutes together and sharing them with all residents, including those who might have missed the meeting and the resident leaders. So very positive feedback about this particular meeting format. Now, with these kind of ideas at the back of your mind, we wanted to launch another poll for you about, we want to tap into our audience. What meeting formats have you tried? Have you tried that mealtime, the dining room meetings? Have you tried the small group programs on every floor or neighborhood? Have you tried virtual meetings, outdoor meetings, or perhaps you have not yet had an opportunity to meet? So we'll give everyone a few moments to input their responses. Okay. I did want to share that there was a comment that came through in the chat box that relates to that, to different meeting approaches that have been used over these last few months. And I believe it was Brittany. I'm not sure what home you're from, Brittany, but I just wanted to thank you. During these last few months, they have maintained continuity and having residents consulted by the resident council assistant on a door-to-door individual basis. So residents are still being kept abreast of what was going on in the home, but also consulted and collected information in that modified format. So thank you, Brittany, for sharing that. I think we can close our polls as we've got a good response rate here. So we have kind of an interesting split here with 45% of our participants who've been trialing that small group meeting format. 36% of our group have not yet had a chance, so I'm hoping that you might leave feeling inspired or confident to take on a trial of some of the suggestions we've shared so far. 20% have utilized the mealtime meeting style, 9% using virtual, and 7% with outdoor meetings. So quite the range there. Thank you for those responses.
So the important work of Residents Council doesn't begin and end at that one monthly meeting every month. Again, I'm reminding us of why Residents Councils are important. 2 functions, really. Residents need to be involved in their home operations, and they need to have operations to express peer support. Ongoing communication is very, very important. So how that communication happens every other day of the month supports decisions that are made and conversations that can be had at that one meeting a month. One of the overwhelming and challenging situations that residents found themselves in over the past few months, and still in many homes, is the absence of information, the absence of ongoing, consistent communication between management and them. Residents' councils stopped, and we heard over and over again from residents that they were in the dark. They didn't know what was happening. They were concerned about their peers. They had little or no opportunity to have questions or concerns addressed. So several months ago, we actually surveyed some residents early on in the pandemic experience and asked them what they wanted to know from management. This was the impetus for the development of what you see on the screen there on this slide. It's OARC's communication tool that was released in the spring, and it has made a significant positive impact in keeping residents informed within their homes. The tool is available on our website. There's a direct link at the bottom of the slide. Our tool can be customized also to reflect the information and updates that residents are seeking. Generally, it came down to 4 specific areas that residents wanted to have communication around. They wanted a commitment from management that communication with residents is priority. They wanted to know what the current COVID-19 status is in their home. They wanted to know what the home is doing to keep them safe. And they wanted to know what the plan was to keep them connected with those they love. So I would encourage you to use the tool on an ongoing basis, even if your home is virus-free. Seek resident input about the format or the frequency with which they would like to have this form used. We can see a natural fit in including residents' council meeting information on this communication tool or vice versa, and identify to residents who they should be in contact with if they have questions or concerns. Melissa?
Okay, thank you, Dee. I also wanted to share a few other communication promising practices that emerged during our consultation with long-term care stakeholders, that mix of residents, resident council assistants, and administrators. And they had an amazing range of ideas that they had been trialing. One great one was to create a resident information center on each home area. So earlier I mentioned that some homes are used to having one resident council board in one area of the home. This is your opportunity to recreate a resident information center in every part of your home. In this particular case, it could be a table or a bulletin board. You can print and display ministry directives, OARC newsletters. We've also been launching regular bulletins that are written to inform residents about what's been going on over the last several months, and any other pertinent info that residents are seeking. So that's one idea for you. If your home is already sending regular email updates to families, you might have a small handful of residents that do use internet and have email accounts. So consider consulting with residents to see if they would like to be added to your distribution list. Another approach that can be implemented between your resident council meetings or until meetings are up and running at your home could be having those informal resident check-ins. One home shared with me that she was doing verbal surveys with a few residents on each home area during her management rounds. And this was an approach, it's kind of an on-the-floor leadership approach that was very well received by residents. Residents felt that they could speak to a member of the management team, ask questions in real time, and that was paired with timely follow-up, which creates positive relationships, promotes trust, and builds confidence. And another great example came from the team at Extendicare Brampton. They created a frequently asked questions document for residents that was very well received. They made an active effort to speak with residents before meeting virtually. So they were using virtual format for council meetings. And this way they were able to specifically address areas of interest that could be prioritized on the meeting agenda. And we've also got another great example from St. Pat's Home in Ottawa. They were utilizing existing technology. So they had in-home TV screen systems located in their common areas, their home areas. They used these screens to share pertinent announcements and keep residents well informed. We also learned of a care community in the United States that utilized their in-house television channel to broadcast home management in real time, answering resident questions on a daily basis, like a live show, live updates from the home team. Some homes have reported that residents have appreciated announcements over the PA system. This, of course, may not be appropriate in every home. It's very important to get resident feedback on what formats they prefer and to make sure information is delivered clearly and sensitively. And so as you can see, there's a common thread here with all of these communication strategies. There's transparency, there's clear, honest communication, and home teams can certainly acknowledge that you don't have all the answers right now, but you provide reassurance and establish trust when you take steps to explain why certain aspects of daily life are changing or have changed, and include residents in the discussions and the planning as much as possible. Now, we do want to save some time for some sharing. I wanted to just highlight one other promising practice that might strengthen your resident councils, build capacity in resident leaders, instill confidence for residents, is a networking opportunity. You know, for years we've been hearing that, you know, resident councils want to know what are other resident councils doing in different parts of Ontario. Unfortunately, it took our current situation to go virtual and offer virtual networking. But since the end of April, we've launched virtual resident forums that bring together small groups of residents to talk about their experiences, to provide peer support. Residents can tune in using a telephone or a computer. The sessions are led by resident leader and OARC board member Barry Hickley, who lives in Windsor. And we've heard very positive feedback. The forums have helped residents feel validated and heard. They've helped residents to combat the loneliness they've been experiencing. They're getting information from their peers about what's going on throughout the province. There are safe, confidential spaces for peer-to-peer discussions. And residents can problem solve together. They might leave a call feeling inspired and bring an idea back to residents' councils. I also wanted to mention, because it's Resident Council Week, we have had 3 special resident forums booked, and one upcoming on Friday. We're going to be having our very first French virtual forum. So if this might appeal to residents in your home, I invite you to encourage their participation. This forum will be led by our bilingual board member, Denise, who's based in Sudbury. So we sincerely appreciate long-term care home teams who have been filtering this information down and letting residents know that this opportunity exists for them. We've got a full roster of session dates available now, so if you have any questions, feel free to reach out for support with registration. We now want to, we've had a few questions coming through as we've been sharing, but if there's anything that we haven't touched on, best practices that have worked for you, other challenges, this is your time to share with the group. We encourage you to use the chat box or to raise your hand, or use the raise your hand feature. If you'd like to speak aloud, we can unmute you. One of the questions that I did see earlier on that I did want to acknowledge was, when you have to shift gears and run resident council meetings in spaces that might not be private. So say you're using a dining room, but there are other team members around, maybe you are in a lobby. How do we make residents feel safe and encourage them to share openly when they don't have the privacy that they might have been used to? Dee, did you want to speak to that?
Hi, thank you, Melissa. This is such an important question. And again, it goes back to the 2 main reasons why residents councils are so important: peer-to-peer support and informing, consensus decisions and ideas for management. I think that the answer, the solution might lie in a combination of types of approaches. Certainly if you consistently have open group meetings in open air spaces, without walls, without doors, without closed parameters, it could erode the ability for residents to feel safe. So I think it's a marriage of a couple of different styles or formats. Perhaps it could be linked up with or partnered with a residents council assistant going door to door, asking residents if they have concerns of a more sensitive nature, and jogging them down. And then in the larger group sessions, mentioning concerns on an anonymous basis. None of this is ideal. This whole situation is less than ideal. So we really do have to look at ways of making the most of it and really asking residents. I think always turning back to the residents council themselves, saying, is this an issue for you? We really want to protect your privacy. What ideas might you have and your peers so that your issues, your concerns are still brought forward in a protected, safe, anonymous fashion.
Yes, and just to add to that, we had some feedback from Christy, who shared that there is lots of disruptions when meetings are being held during shift changes. You hear opening and closing of doors. There's a feeling that sometimes team members don't respect the meeting time. So that's another important education piece. As part of your annual staff education and ongoing meetings with your team, let them know the value of resident council, that it is more than just a monthly meeting. It's an essential platform for them to come together and share. You might be able to put up some signage, meeting in progress, or try your best to schedule your meetings, work with your resident leaders to schedule meetings that are not during one of those busy windows of time, like a shift change, if you're able to do that. I mentioned before working ahead with various departments like housekeeping, dietary. So maybe there is a window of time where team members can leave a dedicated meeting space so that residents can have the privacy.
Thank you, Dee and Melissa. We have a couple of hands up. We have Charlene Cornfield. Charlene, I'm going to unmute your line.
Hi.
Hi. Did you have a question for us or?
Oh, just that was earlier. We hadn't been able to take part in the first question we did, and so I didn't know she still needed us to put that. So, but Kathy is here with me, Brockle, our resident representative, and we're taking lots of notes. We really appreciate these.
Great. Thank you very much, Charlene.
Okay.
I'm just going to speak to one area. We've got a question from Monica. How can we potentially encourage more residents to join council? So you can certainly promote resident engagement opportunities by using the communication tool. I know with priorities shifting, many homes have stopped producing a monthly newsletter, but that is something that residents really look forward to reading, highlights what's going on. Some councils actually have a monthly column in the monthly newsletter, like a resident council corner, where you can say, the resident council meetings are reconvening, we're seeking new resident leaders. We have a special guest speaker meeting with us this month. That might entice more people to come out if they know what the discussion theme might be. So word of mouth, your resident leaders are also your biggest advocates. So I know right now they might not be able to go door to door to speak to their peers to invite them. Some councils have even created a resident council news or a brochure. So that can be given to new residents, encouraging residents to come out for the first time or to kind of encourage residents who have not yet attended a meeting in the past, but if they learn a little bit more about what it's all about, they might be more excited to come. I also find serving refreshments, having the council meeting after another activity that is drawing a big crowd. There's other ways to catch people and encourage.
Thank you, Melissa. We do have another hand up from Jeanette Bowden. Jeanette, I'm going to unmute your line.
He had come in. Like, I know when we're kind of sort of friends, right? So I chatted with him because I thought, oh, okay, what's going on? Because the fire department had come here and during the beginning to treat us to coffee and donuts. And I questioned the guy, said, oh, how's Patrick? And I could tell by the reaction. I said, okay. So I texted him. He told me, says, no, I'm not well. I have to be away from everything, blah, blah, blah. So, because the last time.
Sorry, Jeanette, are you there?
Can we mute that, Jen, please?
Yeah, I will.
Okay.
Sorry.
There was a question that came through from Seth about what's in the resident information center on each home area. It's completely up to you and the residents. What information do the residents want? I just gave a few suggestions, which included the ministry directives, having copies available, as well as OARC bulletins that are written for an audience of residents, again, keeping them abreast of updates, opportunities like the resident forums. You can include the registration link or the phone number to get involved there. So ask the residents what information they're looking for and build the center around that. Some homes also have pictures of resident leaders so they can see which resident to go to if they had questions or concerns. Lots of potential there.
Melissa, it's me speaking. I'm just circling back to the idea or the question we had about privacy, and I just can't get rid of this thought in my head. One of the surveys, one of the poll questions earlier was around barriers to success, and only 4% of our participants indicated that lack of team member or staff was a barrier. However, if privacy is an issue, I think that one of the ways to look at ensuring that residents have the ability to express personal, sensitive issues really does hinge on the availability of team members to speak with residents, even on a one-to-one basis, and bring that information back to a council situation in an anonymous fashion. So many homes I know have introduced a special layer of resident support team member. Some homes call them social engagement ambassadors. Some homes call them resident experience ambassadors. These are non-PSWs, non-certified, non-registered team members that have been brought on board in many homes through the emergency funding through COVID. What a great opportunity it would be to add this level of residents council support to their job, to their portfolio, of course, if approved by the council to branch out in this way. Because the more people you have in your home that could go to residents one by one to survey, to keep the conversation alive in the home, bring that information back to a council meeting, I think would really enrich the opportunity to have some of those sensitive, more private issues come to the table.
Thanks, Dee. We just had one more hand up here. Sherry Williams has a question. Sherry, I'm going to unmute your line. Sherry, you seem to be self-muted.
Let me see.
Okay. Hi, Sherry.
Okay.
Is there a question you'd like to ask?
I did send it by chat also. The question was, in the pictures that we had today, we observed that the residents were wearing masks in the group setting, and I wasn't aware of any, literature or recommendations directing residents to wear masks. Is that something that's being suggested?
Thank you so much for repeating that question that came up. I'm sorry I overlooked that earlier. Great question. there is not an expectation that residents will be wearing masks. In this particular home circumstance, the residents wanted masks, and they actually used, it was part of a resident council initiative to ensure that residents all had a nice cloth mask. So they were very proud of this. And this way, residents would have a mask if they went out into the community. Or no, Dee, feel free to add to that, but I think that was an important clarification. The residents were just proudly sharing off the masks that were part of a project or a fundraiser for council.
It's interesting, Melissa, and participants, I actually did connect with government about this very question just a couple of days ago. And the answer that I received was that directly from the Office of the Chief Medical Officer of Health regarding wearing masks during gatherings. They've advised that masks can be removed once residents are in the room if residents are seated 2 meters apart. So if it is a room that has poor ventilation, then you might want to consider keeping the masks on to decrease the risk. And certainly if they cannot maintain 2 meters apart. Okay.
Thank you, Dee. And I know there's been a number of questions that came through that we haven't had time to get to, so we will do our best to follow up with you on a one-to-one basis following today's webinar. We just wanted to leave you with a few summarizing thoughts, as I know we have taken a few extra minutes of your time, and we're mindful of how busy your schedules are. But I'll hand it over to you, Dee.
Okay, thank you so much. So residents' councils belong to residents. So if you're unclear, if you're not sure, by all means, ask residents what they would like to see moving forward. Residents' councils are mandated. They are they stand alone apart from the operations of the home, but most residents' councils do rely very heavily on the home in terms of support to function. Embrace trial and error approach. Reach out to each other, reach out to your colleagues, reach out to other residents, reach out to OARC. This is the time for us to really come together and spread the news of leading practices and to look forward to creating a new way of normal. This lifestyle is going to be with us all for a very long time, a few more months at least. So it's prudent for us to really evolve our way of looking at the traditional sense of how residents' councils function.
I'm muted again. I wanted to mention that all of the suggestions that we've been sharing can be adapted and used during an outbreak so that residents' councils can maintain their connection. And it might be a combination of the various approaches that we've gone over. It is important to continue to capture your discussions with residents, the decisions that residents are making through your meeting minutes, through your resident council bylaws. So your operating bylaws, that's where you capture how residents want to run the meeting. And if you don't have that document, feel free to reach out to us. It's on our website, but it's important to capture your meeting structure, your governance, all of that in writing. So when there's changes in your resident council leadership team or the people supporting council, you've got those agreed upon practices in writing to refer back to. And I did want to mention that that OARC, we're in the process of reviewing all of our tools and templates through the lens of our current outbreak situation, so that we will include sections for outbreak considerations on our existing tools. So stay tuned for that. I also wanted to let you know that we're in the process of creating a frequently asked questions document that will take a deeper dive into some of the specific areas, such as council elections during an outbreak. How do you navigate that? How are homes facilitating the review of seasonal menu cycles through food committees, etc. So lots of questions have been coming through, and we know in an hour we couldn't cover all those today. So it is a forthcoming document that will be released in October.
This was an important quote from Janet, a programs manager from Primacare. We thought it was essential to start Residents Council again and allow residents to be empowered again and to have their voices heard in one forum again. So as we end today, we want to encourage you to start with yes, this is possible. It may look different, it may feel different, it may not be the ideal, but start with yes, and then take a step back and look at what do we need to do to get there. And I would encourage you that following 3 C's of collaboration, creativity, and commitment, you will get to the yes. You will get to some semblance of Residents Council that will be new and fresh and full of resident opinion that will inform the management of their home, and absolutely an opportunity for residents to connect one with another for peer support. We want to end by saying happy Residents Council Week. It's this week. If you have a moment, please click on this video. It's found on YouTube. It's just a lovely look at the importance of Residents Council from residents' perspective. It celebrates the fact that this is the first Residents Council Week in Ontario, an annual celebration of residents coming together to better their home and to provide that type of very special support for each other. Happy Residents Council Week, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. And anyone who has not had an answer from us, we will be connecting with you for any outstanding questions. Thanks so much, and have a great week, everyone.